Good afternoon, everybody. Tammy from Tammy's Homesteading Crafts. Today's video is going to be a knitting video, episode 6. It's going to be tips and tricks of little things that I have learned and do, and I just thought I would share them with you. So if that is something that interests you, stick around. So before we get started with our tips and tricks, I just want to welcome you all to my YouTube channel. If this is the first time you're finding my channel, I hope you enjoy the content. For those of you who've been coming back from the beginning, I really appreciate you stopping by each week and watching the videos that I put out. If you guys have not subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so. It does benefit me by you subscribing to my YouTube channel. And also, hit that thumbs up button. So let's get started. Okay, so tip number 1. One of the things that I have been doing from the beginning, when I cast on, I am a tight cast oner. And I always have a hard time after I cast on to knit the stitches in pattern off of my cast on. So the first thing that I always do after I cast on is I do one round, whether it's in the round or in the flap, but one row in just knit. I just knit the whole row right out, and then I will start in pattern. It just helps me get the stitches off the needle. If they're too tight, I'm able to just get them all off as a knit stitch, and it adjusts the stitches enough that everything just seems to work. And most people do not notice that I've knit one row of just regular stitches. So that is tip 1. If you are a tight cast oner, to instead of knitting in pattern for that very first row, just knit it and then start in pattern on the second row as you come off of your stitches. So that is tip number 1. Okay, so tip number 2. When you are knitting in the round. Okay, so when you are knitting in the round, you need to close up your circle. One thing that I end up doing is on my first round, when I cast on all of my stitches, and then when I go to join them, I will take my working yarn, which is this, and then the cast on tail, which is this, and I will knit that with the very first stitch that I do to join the two together. I'll drop this cast on yarn, and then I'll finish my round. When I get back to where I've attached them together, I will get ready to knit the next row. Then I will just give this a pull so that it tightens that gap between the two of them. And then I will knit the rest of another round. If I don't need this as a tail to remind me where my beginning of round is or whatever, if I'm not using it for anything, I'll knit that through and tie it off, and that way you don't have to tie anything in because you've already done it. But by doing that, it allows you to have a really nice tight stitch, and you can hardly tell where you're beginning and end around. Once this is gone out of the way, let me do the other side that would be out for people. It's really hard to see where the beginning and ending of round is on that. So that's what I end up doing, and because I need this as my tail when I'm working my 2 at a time socks, this is my tail to know that it's the beginning and ending of round. So I don't tie mine in. But for a couple of rounds, I will keep pulling this just to make sure that those are tight stitches there and there's not a hole. So I've been doing that for quite a while with all of my stitches. And here's actually another pair of socks that I just finished. And it's really hard to tell where my beginning and end of round was because I've got it nice and tight. So that's tip number 2. So tip number 3 is working with barber cord. Now, there's a lot of different things you can do with barber cord. They use it, there's many different sizes, and I actually have 4 different sizes, and I don't know as I have, yeah, here it is. So I have, this somebody gave to me a while ago, and I believe this is 1 millimeter. Or 1.5 millimeters. Yes, I believe this is, it's either 1 or 1.5. I'm not really sure. But this is for your small size 1, 2 needles. 1, 1.5, and 2 needles. This fits really well on. It will fit on your other needles. But my trick and tip about that in a little bit. I also have this green, which is a 2 millimeter, just a little bit thicker. Will go still on those smaller needles, but just a little bit thicker to be able to use onto something that you were maybe using a 3, and you know, you just don't want your stitches to go small. Then I have my 3 millimeter, which is a little bit bigger for when you're doing sweaters and stuff like that, to be able to hold them on. And this would be like your 6, 7 size needles. And then I actually have 4 millimeter, which is actually pretty big, and it'll go on your larger set of needles. So it's like a 10, 11, something like that if you were doing a nice big needle and you needed to put stuff over. So if you're doing a nice sweater that was needing to use that size needle, you'd want to use this because it holds, you know, it's 4 bigger needles and holds the stitches better. Okay, so my tip here is I had to do this on my Easy Bee sweater that I have. Hold on, I got too many skeins of yarn coming out of it. So my Easy Bee sweater that I have, I got my sleeves put on there. And, you know, you had to get your stitches here and you pick up and you do your sleeves. Well, the pattern says to divide those stitches onto front and back of your needle when you are doing them on magic loop, which is okay. I'm okay with that. But when you go to pick them up, you need to pick them up all from the one side to go over. So they're all on, say, the front needle. And you have to put some on the back needle and some on the front needle so that you can easily divide them between your working yarn, so that you have them between half and half on your magic loop when you're doing it magic loop. Well, I ended up doing that, and I got that all cast on. And when I went to, and of course with magic loop, and you're doing them 2 at a time, you have 2 balls of yarn, one for this sleeve and one for this sleeve. And when I knitted, I got to this sleeve, pulled off the stitches that I needed because they were on the front. So when I got here, I knitted my stitches, and then I pulled the 3 stitches that I wanted on the back needle and put them on a stitch marker so that I could pick them up back here. Knit all the way around, finished, picked up my stitches, but I forgot to knit them. Now I'm over here on this needle, and I went all the way around, got everything done, was over here and realized that I had 3 live stitches that didn't get worked. So I'm like, I don't want to unstitch that. So my trick is take your barber cord, stick it on. Now you can only do this if you are doing with 2 balls of yarn. This sleeve is its own ball of yarn. Now my needle was actually all the way over here on this side, so I was ready to start my second sleeve. So I put the barber cord on my needle, pulled it through, all the way through to this side. Now, I could have done it if I noticed it here, and I'll show you what I mean. So you're just going to put your barber cord on the needle, slide it on there, get it in there. And then all I ended up doing was taking and pulling my needle back through. I'm trying to do this. I don't have a table in front of me. Pull my needle back through all of this. just worked it through. Like that, twisting it. Held my stitches on there, knit my 3 stitches on this side, and then hooked it back up and pulled it back through. And take it off. And I didn't have to unstitch all of those stitches, which I didn't need to because they were on their own ball of yarn. So if you're doing 2 at a time and you realize you make a mistake or you missed a stitch over here, put it on barber cord, fix what it is over here, because you'd have both your needles, fix what it is you have over here, and then pull them back through, and that way you don't have to unstitch all of this. So that's a little tip for working when you're doing 2 at a time, so that you don't have to restitch something when it's totally on its own needle or own ball of yarn. So that is tip number 3. Okay, so tip number 4, it's using the correct size of barber cord for what you are doing. When you're working with socks and you're on a 1 needle or 1.5 or a 2, this small 1.5 millimeter barber cord would be good because your knitting needle is so tiny. If you had to put these stitches on hold, they would be about the same size as the needle. So the stitches aren't going to move a whole lot, and you'd be able to have the same size needle, or the stitches wouldn't shrink down. But if you use this when you're doing a size 4 needle or a 5, your stitches are going to get pulled down, and you're going to really fight to get your needle through the stitches. So like for this, if I could use this barber cord in here, but this is an 8 needle. It fits on there, yes, but when I pull it through and I hold it over here and it stays, these stitches are going to tighten down. Even when it tightens on the needle itself because of the cord, but it makes it harder to put the stitches back onto a needle when they've tightened down. My tip is to use the bigger barber cord, like your 3 millimeter, when you're working with a larger size needle, so that the stitches can't squish down as much, and that way when you go to slide them on, they'll slide through easier if you're using a thicker cord. So use the cord depending on the size of your needle. If you have a 4 or larger, use a 3 millimeter cord. If you are using a 1.50, you can use the 1.5 millimeter, or you can use the 2 millimeter barber cord. Just make sure that you know which cord you're using. Now, if you're using an 8, a 9, a 10, you're going to want to use the 4 millimeter cord, because it's going to benefit you when you go pulling those stitches off, because they're not going to shrink down so much, and you don't have to worry about getting that big needle in those stitches when they tighten down on it. I noticed this when I did my baby sweaters. My baby sweater, the sleeves were knit by themselves, and you had all of your stitches. So now on my Easy V, you're knitting the yoke. You end up picking up stitches here under the arm to knit the body. Then when you go to knit the arm, you pick those 7, 8, 10, 12 stitches, whatever they have you pick up or cast on, you pick those up and you knit those with and that's how you close the hole from under the arm. Well, with my baby sweaters, the arms were knit separately, so they were attached on with a raglan knit on the side. So you had the raglan sleeve in that pattern on the sleeve. So when I put those 6 stitches from the sleeves on stitch markers, I actually used the really small barber cord, and I was using a 9 needle. And it was really hard to get my double pointed needle in those stitches when I needed to kitchen them up, because I couldn't get the needle in there. The stitches had tightened down so much that I wasn't able to get it. Really struggled, and it was only 6 stitches. I really struggled getting those in. So the next order I ended up using the number 3 millimeter, and it was a lot easier to slide those stitches back on, because they tightened down on this, yes, but they didn't tighten down so much that I couldn't get a stitch in there. When they were on the 1.5, because I had put them on this little thing, because I was like, oh, I just don't want them in my way. When I put them on this, it was really hard, because they knitted down to this, it tightened down to that size, and I had to get this size needle in there. So the difference was quite a bit, and it really was hard to get those in there. So that's my tip, making sure when you're putting things on, use the right size barber cord. Don't use just a little one to make it, it is frustrating when you're trying to slide them back on that you don't have them on the right, cord. Now, if you have adjustable needles where you can take the tip off, then absolutely, this is the same size as a cord. You could easily put, a lot of times you can screw this onto the end of your cord and use it that way. That's another way to do it, so that you can, stretch it out. But there again, I would suggest using a bigger barber cord or closer to the size of the needle that you have, just so that the stitches don't shrink down too much. That was just easier for me when I did my baby sweaters, and being able to put them on the double pointed needles to kitchener up under the arm. So that was tip number 4. Okay, so tip number 5 is still barber cord. There's a lot of things you can do with barber cord. You can cut little pieces of it off, and you can use it as stitch stoppers. So you're able to take a little piece of barber cord and put it on each side of your needles. Now I have stitch stoppers, but if I didn't, you could take a short piece of barber cord and you could put it on each end of the needle. This actually won't even fit on these ones. They're that big of tips. They're just worn out. But you cut a little piece and you put it on each side of there, and that keeps your stitches from going off. If you don't have the money for stitch stoppers and you have a bunch of barber cord, that's one thing that you can do with barber cord, is using it as stitch stoppers. Of course, you use it for trying stuff on. Use it to, put through and to be able to try on your sweater as making it extra. You're able to actually, if you needed to, you could hook this on your needles, because the needle will screw into it. You could hook this onto your needles and use this as a cord if you needed to. It doesn't slide as easy as your regular cords, but you could if you needed to. Just to get you through to the time, say your cord broke, you could make this the size cord you need and go from there. It's not ideal, but in a pinch, this would work as a cord in your interchangeable needles. In a pinch. You'd have to really be careful that it will not pop off, and you can't pull as hard as you would like to, because you might end up pulling it off and losing your stitches. And that is also why it's good to use the correct size barber cord when you're putting stitches on for sleeves and stuff like that, so that you don't have to worry about them coming off when you're trying to slide them back on and forth, on and off. But yeah, barber cord is good for a lot of different things. A lot of people use them for all kinds of things. You could use it, yeah, there's so many things, I mean, for barber cord. But those are the things I use the barber cord for at the moment. I haven't found a ton of other things that I use it for. I don't do a bunch of different things, but for holding my stitches when I pull off a sleeve, or just to hold stitches, I will put them on a barber cord, a little piece. I have a couple of pieces that are only like this big that I, put on 4 or 5 stitches, and I'll tie it in a knot, and then I will just put it on. I've used it, like I said, at the end of the needles, just to keep it from the needles from coming off, because I didn't have stitch stoppers. I do now have quite a few stitch stoppers, so I have those in all of my bags, so that in my notions kits, so that I don't have to worry about not having stitch stoppers when I go to pull up anything. But yeah, so that is tip number 4, 5, not really sure, can't remember, I lost count. I think it was 4. I think 3 was using the barber cord. This was tip number 4. We'll see, I don't know, I'll put it down there, it'll be whatever it is, I'll correct it as I go along. But I think that is it for my tips and tricks. Well guys, that was it for my tips and tricks. Hope maybe some of them you will be able to use, maybe some you do use already. I just figured if it's something that makes knitting easier and more fun and a lot less of a stress, especially with being able to have a hole when you knit in the round. I always hated having that gap when I attach things in the round and not able to fill that. So by leaving that tail and pulling that tail, I was able to do that. So it was just something that I learned one time, and I've been doing it. And like I said, it's really hard to tell where my stitches changed, because I no longer have a hole or a wide space between my beginning of round when I attach those stitches together. So hopefully some of these tips and tricks are something that you will use and you can benefit from. Well, guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I will see you on the next one. Bye.